Okay. Thank you for coming today. We are pleased to have Dr. Igor Prusa, who was speaking about the Fuji TV scandal from sexual assault to corporate disaster. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Dr. Prusa's work. He is a scholar in Japanese studies and media studies, currently affiliated with the Ambis University in Prague and the Metropolitan University in Prague. In 2017, he defended his second doctoral thesis at the University of Tokyo. His research includes contemporary Japanese society, media scandals, and anti-heroism in popular fiction. His research has appeared in a wide range of publications, including Media, Culture, and Society and Japan Forum. Apart from his academic activities, he is also a music composer and in a Japan-themed band called Nantoku Naru. Unfortunately, we're not going to have a live performance of that today. He is also the author of this wonderful book called Scandal in Japan, Transgression, Performance, and Ritual, where he examines 3 previous big scandals, including the Nori P scandal, a scandal involving Ozawa Ichiro, and the Olympus scandal with Michael Woodford, which I'm sure we're all familiar with because he came and spoke at the Foreign Correspondents Club many times. So with a quick notes on how things are going to proceed today. Dr. Prusa has a presentation on the Fuji television scandal, which is a PowerPoint. After he's done with that, we'll take questions, first from the regular journalist and then from everyone else. We're a little behind time, so we'll probably extend to 2:10. And without further ado, please have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jake, for introducing me. Thank you very much, all of you who came to see this event. This is quite an unusual way how to do scandal theory because these scandals are quite recent, so we should still wait a little longer. My supervisor told me you have to wait for 3 or 4 years if you want to study some scandal. I never followed his advice, and this is how it goes. So since he's not here, I can freely talk to you about the recent scandals. And today I was first asked about to do the Fuji TV scandal, and then there was an additional request to discuss the Ninami Takeshi Suntory drug scandal. But the majority of my presentation will be focusing on the Fuji TV scandal. And at the end, I would mention quite just a couple of things, thoughts, impressions on the Suntory Ninami Takeshi drug scandal. But right now, let me introduce you to this topic, Fuji TV scandal. I will not bother you with a scandal definition. I just want you to understand what is a scandal, how does it work? In other words, what are the basic conditions, preconditions for a transgression to become a scandal? Transgression, that's a violation of rules, norms, conventions, and if this becomes revealed, it's a scandal. So first, a transgression must be disclosed. It must be disclosed by whistleblowers, insiders, informers, investigative journalists. Second, it must be attributed to at least one elite individual. Commoners don't count in scandal. If you do something bad as a commoner, you do a crime. Scandal is for the elites. 3, every transgression must be framed by the media negatively. The media must indicate through framing that somebody is not doing well. Number 4, every transgression must be denounced by the public. If the public doesn't feel moral indignation, if the public is not angry, there is no scandal. And finally, the final condition is sanctions. There should be some form of punishment, either legal or symbolic. Legal punishments include suspending sentences, fines, detention, and so on. Symbolic punishment, and this is quite important in Japan, means loss of face, position, status. And we are talking about the Fuji TV scandal. So now you know what a media scandal is. But we are talking about a media misconduct. That means that the media outlet itself becomes a transgressor. So media misconduct is basically a situation or incidents that are not favorable, not desirable for media outlets, and they are caused by individuals affiliated with or related to such outlets. And if you look at the history of media misconduct, you can find many cases of sex-related misconduct. So somebody from the media outlet does something inappropriate, sexually inappropriate. And in Japan, you had many cases in the past. Fuji TV, NHK, TBS, TV Asahi, all those stations actually had sex-related misconduct. But it is important to realize that this is not a uniquely Japanese thing. If you look at the West, you can follow the same thing. The BBC was touched, Fox News, NBC, CBS, TF1, this is the French outlet. All these media had scandal, sex-related. So the point is that we are not talking about something which is Japan-specific. Of course, there are some performative aspects that make Japanese scandals look different, but the basics and the global patterns are there. First, there is company complicity, which is common. Second, there is advertiser backlash. The advertisers create the pressure. And third, more victims usually come out. And or you can see it from the media logic perspective, there is outside scoop, public outcry, advertiser pressure, some form of report, and some form of reform. So this is media misconduct. And since we talk about the Fuji TV scandal, you know it started as a sex scandal. What is a sex scandal? Well, in Japan, I can recognize at least 5 types of sex scandal. Dating, uvaki, cheating, furin, prostitution, baishun, sekuhara, sexual harassment, and finally sex abuse, seikagai. And these are those most frequent categories of scandal in Japan if it's sex-related. Now, let me, first of all, before I analyze the whole Fuji TV scandal, let me go through a simple timeline. It all started on December 13th when Josei 7 and Sports Nippon started investigating Nakai. They actually sent a questionnaire to Nakai, they sent a questionnaire to Fuji TV and inquiring about some trouble that allegedly happened. On December 19th, Josei 7 published the scoop. That was the very beginning of the scandal. On December 25th, Shukan Bunshun did catch up and picked the scoop from Josei 7. And only 2 days later, Fuji TV refuted the scoop and attacked Josei 7. But Josei 7 didn't respect Fuji TV's wishes and proceeded with print. So this is the 2024 timeline. Now, the real scandal happened in January or since January 2025. Importantly, on January 8, NTV and SoftBank dropped Nakai. That was something very big. 1 day later, Nakai actually admitted some trouble, toraburu. That was all we knew at that point. On January 14th, Dalton Investments, and I will talk about all these people, Dalton Investments sent the first letter to Fuji TV saying we are angry, we are outraged. That's the biggest foreign shareholder of Fuji TV. On January the 17th, Fuji TV's first press conference happened, and it was a disaster, which is also why 1 day later, major sponsors started suspending their advertisements. And on January 23rd, Nakai actually announced to retire from show business. On January 27th, there was a second Fuji TV press conference, and it was also a disaster. I will analyze those conferences a little later. And on February 27th, Hieda Hisashi, the de facto leader of Fuji TV, stepped down as advisor. On March 31st, the third-party committee, Daisansha Iinkai, published their report on the scandal. And on June 14th, in mid-June, the advertisers, slowly but surely, started returning to Fuji TV, indicating that the scandal is almost over. And the symbolic conclusion, let's say, of the scandal was June 19th, when the new president of Fuji TV, Shimizu Kenji, apologized in person to the victim, Miss A. Now, as you can see, there are at least 7 actors. And my task as a scandal analyst is to look at all these actors in the scandal and look at what they do, how they behave, perform, and what they say. Words are, of course, important. And here the main scandal actors were Nakai Masahiro, Miss A, that's the victim, who was anonymized by Jose 7 as Miss A. Then we have Fuji Television itself, represented by President Minato, especially. Then we have Hieda Hisashi, the de facto leader of Fuji TV. Then we have Dalton Investments, the foreign shareholder. Then we have the third-party committee, or panel, if you want. And of course, we have the public. As I told you in the beginning, the public must be angry, must react. So the public is also an important player. Let me now focus on these 7 actors. Nakai Masahiro. The first problem around Nakai Masahiro was when it was found out that in July 2023, he tried to give Miss A basically a hush money, Kuchidomerio, 1 million. But she refused. And we still don't know what happened. We only know that some toraburu, trouble occurred. The victim refused the money because she said, I cannot forgive him, and if I accept the money, it would mean I forgave him, and that's not what I want to do. So it indicated something bigger than just the toraburu. Now, later, Nakai actually made a settlement, 90 million yen, and retired from showbiz. 90 million yen is an incredibly big sum of money. Just compare with Ito Shiori, who was awarded 3.3 million yen after she won her rape case. Now, Nakai Masahiro did not want to perform the ritual. He did not want to do a proper press conference, Kishakaiken, and apologize. Instead, he posted an online statement where he asserted that there was no violence, boryoku wa gozaimasen, and the reports of the weeklies were not accurate, jijitsu to kotonaru. This is quite strong defense of Nakai, not apology. So he's not really apologizing. Then he announced that he had reached a settlement, jidan, which enabled him to continue career without any hindrance, shishonaku. And that made many people angry. Shishonaku. Without any hindrance, I just move on. And then, as a bonus, he attacked the media for speculative inquiries, okusoku de no sensoku, defamation, slander. So it was a combination of defensive and a bit of offensive strategy. Now, in May 2025, which is basically already we are approaching the end of the scandal, Nakai's lawyer disputed the committee report that violence occurred. That was the problem, boryoku. And Nakai's lawyer said there was no violence. Moreover, he said that this framing, media framing, significantly damaged Nakai's reputation and violated his own human rights. So now both people have their human rights violated, and we don't know much what's going on. As for Miss A, the victim, she actually had she was invited by Nakai to have a dinner, and she could not refuse the invitation because of the power disparities. She was a female announcer, and he was a top-notch celebrity used by Fuji TV. So she actually had to do the dinner, and she only agreed to have dinner in a business context. That's important. She didn't agree to a date, while Nakai perceived that more as a date. Now, on June the 6th, 2023, that's 2 years ago, this incident happened on June 2nd, 2023. That's a long time ago. On June 6th, 4 days after the alleged sex assault, Miss A contacted the Fuji TV doctor and consulted. And he said that this is, he recommended trauma therapy, and he said that it was likely that she was sexually assaulted and is suffering. And she also, Miss A also, sent some information to the announcement room, Announsushitsu, but her direct advisor did not report the matter to the compliance promotion office. And that's the place where you actually must report this kind of thing. Now, Miss A ended up really in a bad state, mental, physical. She was actually hospitalized in a psychiatric department with PTSD, She was suffering panic attacks. She engaged in self-harming and suffered with anorexia. And there were also reports that she was suicidal. Now, as a bonus to this horrible treatment, Miss A was subjected to a severe defamation online. She said "hidoi hibo chūshō." So this is, you know, she was really suffering big time. And the last drop was when Fuji TV replaced her while she was hospitalized, replaced her as a regular cast member. And after that, she decided to finally resign on July the 4th, 2024 from the Fuji TV. She simply could not go to work again when she saw that Nakai is doing well, is being casted, and she's just not well anymore. Now, the Fuji TV as an actor, before the scandal, the Fuji TV actually ignored the rumors. They continued to cast and side with Nakai despite the rumors. That was the first mistake of Fuji TV. They underestimated the rumors. Moreover, President Minato actually told others to, I'm quoting, deny what ought to be denied. Hite subeki wa hite shite iko. This was revealed by the third-party committee later in March. So that was before the scandal. After the scandal actually was triggered, Fuji TV still did not want to go on with the ritual, with the script. They framed the matter as a private trouble, praibeto natoraburu, that's the first mistake. And because of that, they treated the matter as an organizational matter, hensei goto. What does it mean? It means that basically nothing happened. And the HR department was excluded from the process. The compliance office was excluded, and the Fuji TV did not make use of any external lawyers, did not hire any human rights experts, victim support experts, and they didn't even consult the doctors who were treating, the Fuji TV doctors who were treating Miss A. Now, Vice Chair Endo Ryunosuke later said that Fuji TV grew arrogant, selfish, and intolerant. It's quite kibishi, but this is what they felt. Vice Chair was really frank. But more importantly for our context, Fuji TV actually did not learn from past scandals and did not adapt to the changing times. As you know, of course, Japan wants to stay within the consensus, maintaining the status quo, no big challenges and changes, but Fuji TV did not realize that this is, we are in 2025. So, and you know, so many scandals before there. We had, for the very first one was Ito Shiori, 2017. Then we had Rina Gonoi, 2022. And then we had Johnny's in 2023. Then we had Matsumoto Hitoshi Sekuhara scandal in 2023. So you see, there were a lot of scandals, but Fuji TV basically lived in a bubble and ignored the changing times. This is part of the corporate disaster that happened. Now, another player, actor in this scandal was Hieda Hisashi. Hieda Hisashi is a business magnate, and he led Fuji TV for 13 years through the so-called golden era of the Fuji television, which is also why he is regarded basically as the company's leader, de facto leader, and his nickname is Fuji TV, Fuji Emperor, Fuji TV no Tenno. So you can imagine how untouchable this person was. And the problem was that he was connected to the scandal because he actually perpetuated the old school culture that is seen as the core of the Fuji TV scandal. And this is also why critics labeled him as a dictator, because he was basically deciding who is on the board of directors, who knows what. And he represented, to the critics, a rotting legacy and a rigged system. Now, Hieda ignored all those connections, all those people who asked him for interview. He didn't want to do any press conference, obviously. He's the untouchable, he's the emperor. Tenno. So he didn't do nothing until March 2025. Because of the huge pressure, he finally resigned as a Fuji TV advisor, but this was rather a cosmetic change because he retained his directorial position. So we talk more about a symbolic accountability rather than substantive accountability. And in August 2025, he finally gave an interview to Bungei Shunju. It was a 10 hours long interview where he denied everything. He said there's no such thing as a tribute culture, Jono Bunka, I will get to that, and there is no such thing as using female announcers as a bait at the parties with sponsors. He basically denied everything. Now, Dalton Investments is a Californian hedge fund company, and it's Fuji TV's largest foreign shareholder. It has 7% of shares, and if you have more than 1%, then you can actually contact the board of directors and have some requests. And Dalton actually sent 4 letters, open letters, to Fuji TV. The first one was on January 14th. Dalton Investments literally said, as one of your largest shareholders, we are outraged. So you can see this is where the outside pressure starts, Gaiatsu. Then there was another letter 1 week later where Dalton said that the press conference, which I will be talking about later, the first press conference must be repeated and a third-party committee must be established. In the third letter from February the 3rd, they actually framed Hieda Hisashi as a dictator and insisted that he is responsible and he must resign. And the final letter on April 16th was Dalton proposing 12 new candidates for the board of directors at Fuji TV. But Fuji TV refused all of those 12 candidates. So Fuji TV was not listening to Dalton. And it was not only Fuji TV. Many people in Japan were critical about Dalton and these letters being sent to Fuji. Ninami Takeshi, we'll be discussing him later in a separate scandal. Ninami Takeshi criticized the letter, said that he didn't understand the meaning. It was meaningless to send letters to Fuji TV. Toyota Mayuko, ex-LDP, now Sanseto, also attacked Dalton Investments. What the hell is this entity about? This was suspicious. So you see that this was an external pressure, but still the Japanese conservative circles were maintaining the status quo anyway. Now the third-party committee, Daisansha Iinkai, was the game changer in the scandal. Why? Because it was established on January 23rd, and they released the final report on March 31st in accord with the Japanese Federation of Bar Associations, Nichibenren. And the committee was consisted of lawyers, human rights advocates, former media executives, and it was led by Takeuchi Akira, who is really an expert on this kind of corporate disaster. So he was really the best person to look at the case. And the final report was damning. Actually, the committee confirmed that there was customer harassment, kasuhara, and there was sexual violence, seiteki boryoku. Moreover, the committee confirmed that the incident, the trouble, occurred on the extension of work, gyomu no encho senjo. And this is important because this is the moment where Fuji TV is directly involved in the scandal. And finally, the committee confirmed that there was a multiple secondary harm to the victim, Niji Higai, and it was a clear human rights violation, Jinken Shingai. And finally, we have the public as an important actor. There were many protests, actually, outside Fuji TV's headquarters. Many people protested on the streets. There was a petition signed by hundreds of thousands of people, which is quite big. And the internet was in flames. There was online flaming. There were coming out hashtags. And the audience still was polarized. If you look at the social media, one part of the people, the fans, were saying Nakai-kun shinjitai, I want to believe in Nakai-kun, it was just a trouble, while the other part was saying Nakai-kun o terebi de mitakunai, I don't want to see him on the television anymore. Moreover, people were mocking the slogan of Fuji TV. You know, if it's not fun, it's not TV. Tanoshiku nakareba terebi janai. And the public were mocking this, saying that the actual meaning of the slogan is, as long as it's fun, anything goes. Tanoshikereba nandemo oke, Fuji deva. So you see that the audiences, the public was really rather moved by the scandal. And that's important. Moreover, somebody drew a graffiti on Hieda's residence on the wall of his house saying, Fuji, stop broadcasting. Fuji wa te wa shiro. It was written in a yellow paint, in a spray, you know. So these are the moments where you actually see that the public is angry. This is what constitutes a proper scandal, when the public is even radical and extreme. And on April the 13th, there was a Mainichi poll, and the question was to the people, can Fuji TV restore trust? And 54 people said no, and only 15 people said yes. So you see, this is quite damning for Fuji TV and the trust. Now, let me move to the media coverage. You know, I'm a media scholar, so I have to look at the way the media cover the scandal. And in my book, you may know that I distinguish between, there's a dual structure in Japanese mediascape. There are inside media outlets and outside media outlets. The inside media, that's the media oligopoly. That's Yomiuri, NHK, Kyodo, news agencies, the dailies. And these all are members of Nihon Shimbun Kyokai, Japanese Newspaper Association, and they are running something which is called Kishakurabu system, or the Reporters Club system. I have no time, and I think that you all are aware of Kishakurabu, so I hope you know what we are talking about. I only say that because of the Nihon Shimbun Kyokai and Kishakurabu, the media, the inside media practice self-censorship, jishuku, and they rather avoid investigative journalism. They tend to ignore or downplay scandals, precisely of those limitations. On the other side of the mediascape are the outside media outlets, and that's basically the media periphery. Weekly tabloids, monthlies, foreign media, importantly, political papers such as Akata Shimbun, and online communities, the social media. The social media are growing much and much more important these days in scandal coverage. And precisely because the outside media are not members of Nihon Shimbun Kyokai, and because they are excluded from the Kisha clubs, they can actually attack. They don't have that much information, but they are more independent and free to attack from the outside the establishment. And of course, it's most usually it's the weekly tabloids, the shukanshi, that trigger scandals in Japan. And this is the logic, the media logic of scandal in Japan. You have the outside media first, then only if there is enough pressure, the inside media pick the scoop and make it a proper scandal. Without the outside media pressure, there are no scandals. And this was exactly what happened in the Fuji TV scandal. It was a textbook example of the dual structure of Japanese mediascape. On December 18, Josei 7 online scoop published. That was the very first thing. 1 day later, Josei 7 print. 2 days later, News Post 7 picked the scoop. On December 25th, Shukan Bunshun and Sponichi, Spotsu Nippon, covered the scoop. And after that, slowly but surely, the social media started to catch up, and the foreign media, important actors in the outside pressure, started covering the case. So you see, this is the December development. And only after that, and thanks to this pressure, on January 7th, Asahi Shimbun, which is rather liberal inside medium, published an online coverage of the Nakai incident or trouble. Still, it was rather conservative. 1 day later, Mainichi joined Asahi and printed an article about Nakai Masahiro. And on January the 10th, NHK World Japan, the television, discussed the so-called incident. But people did not know really what was going on. There was a trouble, there was a settlement, and things move on. So there was this attempt to maintain the status quo despite the scandal. And on January 15th, almost 1 month after the first scoop, Yomiuri, Sankei, and Nikkei finally touched upon the scandal. And 1 day later, the NHK opened the topic, and that was pretty much, that became a common knowledge. So you see, it took 1 month for the media, for the inside media, to catch up and to actually make the scandal real. Otherwise, it would be only a tabloid gossip. If the weeklies are, and if the foreign media online weeklies are focusing on something, it's still on the level of tabloid gossip. You need the inside media to cover it so that it becomes a huge, full-fledged media scandal. Interestingly, the foreign media in this case, and the foreign media often step in and they cover the scandal from the outside, which is part of the outside pressure or gaiatsu. Interestingly, the first foreign media were the French media. I don't know why, perhaps because it was sex-related, and maybe the French media were interested in the sex aspect of this. And the first one was on January 8th, BFM TV, which is a rather unknown French digital news site, and they covered it. 1 week later, Le Parisien, which is a French tabloid, picked the scoop, and one day after that, Le Figaro, which is already a big French daily, covered the scandal. And only after that, on January 23rd, the BBC and the Associated Press covered the scandal, which is the moment where the scandal became basically a global knowledge. It almost became a global scandal, thanks to the BBC and the Associated Press. And as for the social media, there were actually 4 waves. The first wave was after the first letter from Dalton Investments. People were either mocking Dalton or mocking Fuji TV. The second wave, online flaming, Netto and Joe, came after the first Fuji TV press conference, which itself was a disaster. I will talk about it later. The third wave of online flaming came after Shukan Bunshun admitted a mistake in their reporting. Initially, Shukan Bunshun said that one Fuji TV employee was actually involved, some mediator who invited the victim to Nakai's residence, but that was wrong. So people were hating Shukan Bunshun for some time. And the last final wave, that was basically the coming out hashtag, the real reason I left my job. Watashi ga taishoku shita honto no ryu. And that was pretty much online flaming. So there were thousands, tens of thousands of people actually revealing that they left their job because of harassment or sexual violence. Now, this is the media production flow, but we have to also look at the media framing. You know that the media have to frame every event somehow, indicate, suggest further meanings by selecting or deselecting words, for example. And if you look at the media framing during the scandal, you see that every outlet had a little different approach, depending on how conservative or liberal they are. Jose 7, which was the initial scoop, brought in Jose to no aida judai toraburu. That was the very first report. Serious problem with the woman. That's all we knew. Shukan Bunshun, 1 week later, came with also problem with the woman. They framed it as Jose toraburu. I know it's quite ambiguous. But in the next edition, in the second bullet, they actually switched to sexual assault. And that was quite important. Seiboryoku. Once they mentioned sex and assault, that became a serious trouble. Asahi and Mainichi were framing the event as sexual trouble. Seiteki toraburu. See, they did say sex, but they didn't mention the violence. And Yomiuri Shimbun, as expected, was very conservative. So Yomiuri Shimbun was sticking to a complication with the woman, Jose Mondai, Jose Toraburu. Now, you know that this is really not the best way how to describe any sexual harassment, because it looks like it's the woman who's at fault, because it's the woman's trouble, right? So Yomiuri was really not covering the case as they should do. As for Nakai Masahiro himself, as I told you, he framed the incident as a Toraburu, trouble, nothing more, nothing less. President Minato from Fuji TV was talking about a private trouble between man and woman, danjokan no praibeto na toraburu. And that was really the starting point where people started hating Fuji TV, because if you say it's private, then it's an organizational matter, and Fuji TV has nothing to do with that. However, the third-party committee published the report and on March 31st, and they actually defined and confirmed that there was sexual violence involved. Seiteki boryoku. By the way, if you check Wikipedia, they are also rather conservative, following the Yomiuri Shimbun line. So Wikipedia are talking only about the Fuji TV problem, Fuji Terebi Mondai. So you see how the framing, basically the scandal became a contest over frames. Which frame will win, which frame will lose, which frame will catch up or not. Now, let me move to the performative aspect of Japanese scandals, and this scandal in particular. Let me take a look at those 2 press conferences. Fuji TV did a first press conference on January the 17th, 1 hour, 45 minutes, very short. Only 33 reporters were there. President Minato and Vice Chair Endo were the main speakers, and Hisashi Hieda was not there. He was absent. This is, you know how the power needs to stay invisible. If you are a Fuji TV emperor, you must not be there. Now, this conference became a scandal by itself because the attendance was restricted to Fuji TV Press Club only. And the outside media, weeklies, foreigners, freelancers, were not allowed to participate. Moreover, live streaming and video footage was prohibited, and even the NHK was allowed to be there as observers. So this was the first press conference in terms of data and format. If you look at the press conference from the performance and ritual aspect, then it was a combination of apologetic and defensive strategies. Shazai senryaku combined with Mamori no senryaku. There are three types of strategies: apologetic, defensive, offensive. Shazai, Mamori, Seme. Fuji TV chose the safest way. Apologize, but defend themselves. So, of course, in every scandal ritual, you need to have those words. Sincerely apologize, owabi moshiageru, great concern, tadaina shimpai, go shimpai gomewaku must be there. That's part of the ritual. They apologize for not being able to explain until now. Imamada setsume deki nakata, moshiwake gozaimasen. But then they switched to a defensive strategy, and they said that no Fuji TV employee was actually involved. Shain no kanyo wa nakatta. And President Minato said, I will refrain from answering questions, kaito hikaeru, which by itself is okay, but he said it more than 30 times. So that was a no-no, that was a tragedy, because you can imagine how angry people were, and the impact was devastating. Shukan Bunshun said that that was the worst press conference ever, Shijo Saitei no Shachou Kaiken, and immediately Toyota, Nissan, Suntory, McDonald's, Lawson, 7i, and NTT stopped airing the ads on Fuji TV. Moreover, there was an online petition signed by 16,000 professionals who demanded a new, fully open press conference. And that actually happened because, as you see, the pressure goes from all sides now. You have internal pressure, you have external pressure. So actually, Fuji TV was pushed. It was not some sort of soul-searching. They were pushed by the pressure to do a second press conference, which was basically a repeat of the first one on January 27th. And it was 10 hours, 23 minutes long. There were 437 reporters. It's like 300 more reporters than before. And the presenters were President Minato, Chair Kano, Vice Chair Endo, Fuji Media Holdings President Osamu, and Kenji Shimizu, who became the new president, while Minato and Kano were scapegoated. You know, in scandals, there must be some scapegoat. Somebody has to go. Somebody has to resign. It's some form of misogi, purification ritual, resignation, apologies, ideally tears. But there were no tears in this case, unfortunately, because sometimes the journalists are counting the tears. But there were no tears here. And as for the format, it was actually this time open to all media outlets. That's why you had more than 400 reporters there. It was streamlined on Fuji TV website without any ads, and the viewership at 8 or 9 o'clock at night peaked at 14.5%, which was twice as much if compared to the previous week. So it was not a big event, but people were interested. Moreover, nobody wanted to stay there for 10 hours, so many of my colleagues were there just for 1 hour or two, and then they went back home because it was ridiculous. And why was it ridiculous? Yeah, because, again, Fuji TV combined the apologetic and defensive strategy. So first, they again apologized, kokoro kara owabi, for infringing on human rights. Jinken no shingai, that's important, because obviously they were told that this must be uttered, this word. Before that, they were ignoring human rights. And Kenji Shimizu said that he wanted to apologize to the victim, Mr. A, in person. Honnin ni aishite owabi. And that was perceived as a good point, as a good step. Moreover, the performance was quite well synchronized. All of those 5 presenters did a synchronized deep bow in the level of saikei. You know, you have at least 4 types of bow in general, and in scandals in particular. You have eshaku, 15 degrees. Keirei, 30 degrees, and Saikei, 60 up to 70 degrees. And actually, Minato and others did this Saikei for 10 seconds, which is very long. Usually it goes up to 7 seconds. So they did a 10 seconds long psyche twice. So in terms of performance and ritual, it was perfect. It was very well done. However, as I told you, soon Fuji TV switched to the defensive strategy again, Mamori no Senryaku. So they said they only protected the woman's privacy, Josei no Puraibashi Hogo. That's why they didn't tell no one. That's why they allegedly excluded every offices. Endo said that there was a disagreement in perception, ninshiki no fuichi, so he basically wanted to say there was just a simple misunderstanding between Nakai and the victim. They just, ninshiki no, they didn't perceive the situation, and there was a disaster. When he said that, the reporters started shouting at him, screaming at him, ikagen nishiro, and the press conference basically turned into a chaos, near chaos. People started screaming, people starting asking without being called, people starting having monologues, minutes long, some moralistic stuff. And Minato, to pour oil on the fire, he said that Hieda is not there, Hieda Hisashi, because he had nothing to do with it. Kankei shitenai. And that was really not what the reporters and the general public wanted to hear. So there was a Q&A ordeal, people screaming, shouting, more than 10 hours long, because freelancers were participating, and the freelancers, one YouTuber was kicked out of the venue because he was just ridiculously screaming and aggressive. And moreover, the committee confirmed that with this press conference, there was a multiple secondary harm to the victim, the way the Fuji TV was speaking. Now, let me talk a bit about the general issue in the background of this scandal and many others that preceded it, namely sexual violence and gender inequality in Japan. I don't need to tell you that Japan is not doing really well in terms of both. In 2024, 10 to 20 rapes out of 1,000 cases resulted in a criminal conviction, and the World Economic Forum inequality ranking is really quite low. And the pathologies...
He's going to stay 20 minutes after, so we have time for questions, in case you were worried that you're not going to have time for questions.
I'll try to make it, I'll try to go faster. What are the pathologies? And we know these are the usual pathologies: male-dominated, homogeneous, closed structure, the so-called old boys club. That's how the third-party committee labeled the Fuji TV leadership, old boys club, in which women may be objectified, harassment tolerated, punishments are not enforced, and the victims suffer in silence. They are transferred, instead of being treated like victims, they are transferred to other departments. They are pressured to resign, and they still feel shogunai, it can't be helped. So victims do not speak up. So Miss A was an exception because she did speak up and she did blow the whistle. Now, to narrow it a little down, we have the issue of female announcers, Joshi Anna. The victim was a female announcer at Fuji TV, and since 1980s, Fuji TV was actually grooming and commodifying announcers as Tarento. So this is, and unfortunately, sekuhara, sexual harassment, was part of the deal ever since the 1980s. There are books published by Fuji TV itself, Anahon Ichi, Anahon Ni, and sekuhara was documented long time before that. So basically, everybody knew that you have to be, as a female announcer, you have to be young, wakai, cute, kawaii, and then you are risono jose for the male executives. So this is the problem of female announcers, and these announcers are used as high-class hostesses, joshitsuna kyabajo, and even Mainichi Shimbun, an inside medium, confirmed that announcers were always used in Fuji TV as a bait at parties with sponsors. And the mechanism is simple. You have a drinking party, nomikai, in some public space, bar, restaurant, that's no problem. But then the people, the female announcer and the producers and celebrities move to a nijikai, an after party, which is usually in luxurious hotel suites. In this case, it was Tokyo Hyatt Hotel, and in many others as well. And that's where sexual harassment and sexual violence happens. Now, many executives at the Fuji TV joined the company during the Showa era. That was an era where harassment was quite, rampant. And even now, there was a survey in Fuji TV, and 40% of Fuji TV employees were harassed in the past, and 66 of them were reluctant to report it. So you see, this is the third-party committee said that Fuji TV was the worst among all those media stations. Obviously, Fuji TV is not the only one. For example, the TBS station also revealed that there were at least 4 cases in the past, and so on. In other words, you see that that there was a change. There was something. The movement started when there was pressure. External gaiatsu from foreign investors, global press, and international agencies, and internal naiatsu from Japanese advertisers, Fuji TV employees, and the Japanese public. And I'm going to finish soon. What were the scandal consequences? Well, Fuji TV and Fuji Media Holdings, they lost audience. There was advertiser exodus. They had to cancel shows, including Dareka to Nakai, which was Nakai Masahiro's flagship show. He was doing it with Matsumoto Hitoshi, which is why it was called Matsumoto Nakai, but after Matsumoto Hitoshi's scandal, it was renamed to Dareka to Nakai. So I was wondering, they maybe wanted to, after Nakai's scandal, it should have been Dareka to Dareka. But no, they canceled the show altogether. There were some changes, so the scandal had some consequences. Jake Arlestein, in his reporting, mentioned that actually the executive age was lowered to 59.5%, and the females on the board were increased toward the 30%, which was the ideal. Pay was reduced by 50% for president and CEO, 30% for directors and auditors, but still, again, Mainichi complained that the punishments were too lenient, amasugiru. Many people were exempted. This is the scapegoating mechanism. You scapegoat a couple of people in the front, but the structure basically remains the same, and Hisashi Hieda was out of the game. He didn't have any problem. Interestingly, the internal pressure included the Fuji TV Labor Union. The membership of Fuji TV Labor Union grew from 80 in the beginning of January to more than 500 at the end of January. So the employees were actually organizing themselves, and many female announcers joined the union after the scandal. And the Labor Union published or submitted an opinion paper which said Fuji TV must hold a press conference, must invite all media, and must establish the committee. As for the advertisers, they quickly distanced themselves from Fuji TV. On January 21st, Toyota and Nippon Life triggered a domino effect. They were the biggest ones, and when Toyota and Nippon Life actually pulled ads, more than 300 sponsors exited. And in April of 2nd, Suntory chair Ninami Takeshi actually said that companies should consider resuming ads. So Ninami Takeshi, now himself embroiled in a scandal, was the first one who said, oh, come on, be nice to Fuji TV. They did what they did. Michisuji ga miete kita. Let's all return to normal. And this is my last remarks about the scandal. Can we say this is part of the MeToo movement in Japan? Well, obviously the answer is yes and no. If you want to say yes, then yes. The scandal fallout looks to be a cultural shift and a turning point for empowering future victims. After all, Japan of 1987, when SMAP and Nakai Masahiro debuted, is not the Japan of 2025. That's what the optimists would say. And even Asahi Shimbun in March wrote that people are, thanks to the scandal, finally able to say publicly that they were treated unfairly. However, the pessimists would say that there were so many sex scandals in the past, but they had only few of the consequences. Machiko Osawa, the biggest expert on gender inequality and sexual abuse, said Japan is not moving fast enough. The progress is too slow and uneven. And Mainichi Shimbun, again, even reported after the scandal that the female announcers being objectified as beauty objects is a tradition that will continue. It may not really stop. So This is something I don't do. I am usually very pessimistic, as you know me, in my book and in my talk. But today I want to make an experiment and I want to go optimistic, okay? I know this is naive, but still, let me be optimistic. I would say that business as usual would no longer be tolerated. Takura Kimoya, after Johnny's scandal, said the show must go on. But now the show cannot really go on like this. The scandal means the end of unchecked celebrity protection and the end of corporate and media silence. And yes, Fuji TV actually is revamping internal policies, inspecting all allegations, training police. And as for the gender norms, let's believe that gender awareness is growing. Of course, it's slow, it's not so fast, but there is some movement, and the deep-rooted patriarchy may be softening. After all, those strict gender norms, roles in Japan are no longer fitting the social and economic realities. So if Japan wants to catch up socially and economically, there has to be gender equality or movement toward that. And one last good thing is that the universities in Japan, some of them who do broadcasting and media programs, they actually added gender sensitivity and ethics training to their programs. And this is something I would say which is good because, as you know, it all starts with the education from below, the people. So this is all good stuff, and I would like to thank you for your attention regarding this one scandal. And now I don't know what's next.
Thank you very much. Let's have a round of applause for an incredible...
Thank you.
He had prepared some stuff about the recent Suntory scandal, but we do not have time, so we're just going to go right into the questions and answers here. We have to be out of here at 2:15, so when you come up to ask a question, please state your name, what organization you represent, and try to make it questions and not speeches. Raise your hand if you'd like to ask Dr. Prusa a question.
In case you are curious about the Minami Takeshi scandal, you can ask me a question about the Suntory scandal and I can go on.
Yeah, we may have another conference about that in the near future.
Yeah.
So I'm Professor Christopher Hood. I'm a Japan Foundation Fellow, currently based at Tokyo University of Foreign Studies. Igor, thank you very much for this very comprehensive look at the scandal. The question I want to ask is, I mean, I get the idea of the outer and inner media. This is something I'm aware of from my own studies, but my impression of the Japanese media is they always, even the inner media, knows more than they print, and the outer media probably knows even more than that. I'm assuming because Miss A has disappeared off screens that actually a lot of people know exactly who she is. And on that basis, has there been any pressure for her to go more public, to be a representative of more women as part of a Me Too movement?
Yes. That's exactly the problem. Miss A didn't want to be known. She wanted to stay anonymous. But on the other side, she was actually posting on Instagram pictures from the hospital. And so people knew, and both inside and outside media were perfectly aware of that. But I guess they were all trying to protect her privacy, privacy no hogo. And that's why she didn't become well known. But unfortunately, this is the problem for Me Too, because if you want to have Me Too, you need to have real names, real faces, people coming out like fully. And this is something that is not really happening in this case.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Other questions? Fred?
Fred Varco, freelance. Welcome back, Igor. A couple of things. One, and this is kind of speculation, maybe you can't answer it, is that do you think that Nakai understood that maybe sexual assault was normalized because he was part of Johnny's, where Johnny was raping people for decades?
Exactly.
And Nakai would have known that. He would have known people who had been raped by Johnny.
That's the paradox, because Nakai may have been one of those Johnny's victims himself.
Yeah.
Or he must have known about what's going on about Johnny's, But he didn't learn any lesson from that. On the contrary, it almost looks like he was infected by the Johnny's pathologies, by the Johnny's raping. So he thought that it's normalized, and it was part of the business ever since the beginning in the 1980s. So yes, I think he didn't realize that the times were changing and some victims are speaking up. He just thought it was a misunderstanding. He wanted to keep it, I gave you those 5 levels of sex scandal. He wanted to keep it as uvaki, but it became seikagai. So that's the problem of framing. And he must have known better that this is not a safe way to do it. But I think he was used from all those decades of entertainment culture, Joshi Anna, female announcers. It was part of the culture. That's the problem. If you are part of the culture, you don't realize you're doing something wrong. And especially when you are in a bubble, in a showbiz bubble, you sort of tend to forget that there are people outside and there are more victims coming out these days.
And my other question is partly what the gentleman before said about the media and also prosecutors, because the media and the prosecutors know a lot more.
Yes.
They know when crimes have been committed but still don't do anything. I mean, I knew about Johnny in the 80s. Everyone knew about Johnny.
Exactly.
But nobody said anything. Prosecutors did nothing and the media did nothing.
Exactly.
Is this changing, and are they to blame?
The prosecutors in Japanese scandals play an essential role always. It depends on if they step in or not. But in this case, Miss A didn't want the matter to become public, and it ended up in an out-of-court settlement. That was the jidan, not 90 million yen. So the prosecutors didn't step in, and Miss A herself did not. She was considering contacting police and trying to make it a big deal, but she was advised by her female colleague not to do it, not to go this way, not to contact the police, not to involve the prosecutors, if she wants to keep it below radar. So that was exactly when if the prosecutors, if the police would have stepped in and treated it as a sexual assault, it would have become much bigger an issue. But precisely because she wanted to keep it silent, she wanted to keep it, safe, it didn't become a prosecutorial issue. But the prosecutors are very often part of the game in scandal.
Fred, I think we should point out that Shukan Bunshun actually did an investigative series on Johnny Kitagawa and his sexual assault of young boys working for Johnny's Jimusho, and even covered the sexual harassment trial where he lost. I think what happened is that the inside media refused to cover it, so it remained a tabloid story for the most part. I'm just going to ask one question here. Can you think of other examples where there were scandals that never really gained traction because the inside media refused to cover on them?
Well, that's the majority of them. We see only the tip of the iceberg. So there is one book, Scandal and Silence by Robert Entman, and he actually showed in the United States, but it will be similar in Japan, that actually what we see is only a little bit of what's going on really below the surface. That's why it's much more often the case that there is silence and not scandal. So I cannot tell you which cases were uncovered. Maybe you can come up with some. But precisely because they were not uncovered, we don't know about them.
Other questions? Sir?
I'm a member of the club. Having worked for 3 major international financial organizations and currently with a UK-based fintech company, the most interesting observation I want to make in terms of, not directly related to this topic, but in general, in terms of harassment and compliance, I found it interesting that having joined this startup fintech, I had to answer, as a representative of Japan, pass a series of tests, including 3 times being asked a specific question. When you're uncomfortable with your supervisor, who can you address your issues on compliance and harassment? The consistent answer was every employee has the right to send that message to the CEO or the board, and they will take immediate action.
Yeah.
So what is Japan doing in this area in enabling employees to go right to the top?
Well, as I told you, the victims are too afraid to come out with anything. So in this case, you can see that the victim, Miss A, actually contacted the announcement room, Announsushitsu, but it didn't go to the compliance office. And the Fuji TV leadership did know about the trouble from Nakai. They met with Nakai, but they decided to ignore it. They decided not to spread the information. The boards of directors at Fuji TV did not know. They were in the dark for 1 month. So the information was not spreading across the whole organization, and it was precisely because President Minato decided to kill the case. So once you have the top head, in this case President Minato, if he decides to deny what ought to be denied, then nobody knows. It was only the doctors who knew, who treated the victim, one female superior colleague of the victim, and one more manager. But that manager, unnamed, did not go to the compliance office. They just thought that it's for the good of the victim if we keep it silent. They interpreted it as her wish not to spread the information. But her wish was to go back to business as normal, to return to work. But it doesn't mean that the compliance office would not touch upon it. The compliance office failed, and the information flow failed. You know, there is this old boys club up there with Minato, Otatoru, and one more manager, and they are totally disconnected from the workplace, from the Gemba. So nobody actually knew nothing. And as I said, it took 1 month for the board of directors to find out about some trouble at all. So the information management was poor, and the Old Boys Club was maintaining its microcosm by all means.
I have one question from online, which is there a substantial difference between the dogeza, where you get on your hands and knees and prostrate and put your forehead on the floor, and the deep bow? And,
yes.
And what is that difference?
As I told you, you have Eshaku, 15, Keirei, 30, Saikeirei, up to 60, 70, and then you have Dogeza, you prostrate. And Dogeza is reserved only for the most serious cases. If you remember the HIV scandal of the Green Cross back in the last century, the head of the Green Cross did a prostration pose, Dogeza. And this is really but it doesn't mean, you know, the transgression and the scandal is not the same. The transgression can be minimal, but the scandal is huge and people make Dogeza. Or there is a huge transgression, but the scandal is minimal and people don't do anything at all. So it's the Dogeza is reserved for the most serious cases. For example, when somebody dies or is infected by HIV. But on the contrary, look at Taguchi Junnosuke, Kattun, the celebrity who had a drug scandal. He was smoking marijuana, he was caught smoking with a joint. And he did a Dogeza prostration pose for 16 seconds in front of the police station. That was about the longest Dogeza I've seen. And he did it just because of a joint. So you see, there is a disproportion. It doesn't mean that there is a transgression and you respond to the transgression. No, you respond to the pressure created by the revealed transgression. But the rule is that the more serious the case, the more likely it is that somebody goes down on the Dogeza.
We have time for one more question. Does anyone have a question? Okay, Fred. Make it one part question, please.
As one rock star to another, I wonder if you could just maybe compare it to scandals that haven't been scandals, but some people say they are. Like Jimmy Page, for example, of Led Zeppelin, it's reported and admitted that he kidnapped a 14-year-old girl and lived with her for a while.
Oh, really?
And you have Roman Polanski, of course, who had a big scandal. But rock stars don't seem to be getting prosecuted. There's a lot of historic cases in the UK now, but rock stars aren't getting prosecuted. DJs and other people are getting prosecuted. Can you explain that? And maybe it's to do with the reaction or lack of reaction.
I believe that in the West, if you're a celebrity in the West, people understand that it's about sex and drugs and rock and roll very often. So people are much more, able to forgive even such great transgressions such as kidnapping someone. But in Japan, this doesn't work like that. This is really, as I told you, the cartoon leader, he's also not a rock star, but he's a musician, but he had to do dogeza anyway, and he had to disappear for some period of time. So the rock stars are not immune in Japan. In the West, rock stars are more immune than the Japanese ones. You know, we say, oh, well, it's Britney Spears, she shaves her head, well, she does this and that. That's just, you know, how celebrities work. But in Japan, you have the responsibility, sekinyin as a shakaijin, as a part of the society first, and then you are some celebrity, you know? So the sekinyin, the responsibility differs from the West and Japan.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Fred. We're going to close out. Before we do, some matters of business. For Dr. Prusa, a one-year membership to the FCCJ. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Finally, I violated our own protocol and did not identify myself. I am Jake Edelstein, author and writer for Tempura and Campside Media. Thank you very much for coming today. We are adjourned.